Did you know that the Supreme Court unanimously sided with a Texas man, if I remember correctly, a black man, who says it's not a crime for marijuana users to have guns? Check with everyone. In case you didn't know, when you purchase a firearm in the United States, you sign a form that goes to the ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the administrative department that manages civilian ownership of firearms, among other things. And when you fill out that sheet, you are complying with federal legislation, and federally, marijuana is illegal. Schedule 1. So, when the sheet asks you, do you consume any illegal drugs, or whatever, however they phrase it, every American simply lies, because everyone smokes pot or has smoked pot at some point, and the idea that if you live in a state that has for years and years and years had it legal for, you to smoke marijuana, the idea that the Second Amendment doesn't apply to you is insane. And the Supreme Court has finally ruled in favor with that. The Supreme Court ruled Thursday against a broad federal ban on gun ownership by marijuana users, the latest in a line of firearm cases from a court that's expanded gun rights. This is good. This is good. This is a very unenforced law that has only been brought up usually in cases of prejudice. So, for example, say, he is black, right? The defendant doesn't say. I thought he was. I thought I saw an article. Isn't this what they got Hunter Biden on? Yeah. Nobody gets prosecuted for this, but they went after Hunter Biden for it. Very, very dumb. But a unanimous vote in favor of Ali Daniel Himani, Hispanic? A Texas man who argues the law barring guns from anyone who uses illegal drugs violates the Second Amendment, which it does, for sure. The decision is a loss for Trump's Republican administration, which had defended the 1968 law despite arguing against other gun restrictions. What are the votes? What are the votes? It's unanimous. It was a unanimous vote. Unanimous decision. There are the judges who voted in favor of the defendant. Does that mean Hunter Biden's conviction will be overturned? He was already pardoned by Trump. Or sorry, not by Trump, by Biden. Biden already pardoned him. Which I think was based in red-pilled, honestly, because for one, Biden really does love his son. And for two, that was bullshit prosecution. This is like an incredibly selectively enforced law. The case made for some unusual political alliances. The ACLU and the NRA supported Himani's case, as did cannabis legalization groups like NORML. Biden could have pardoned nonviolent drug offenders. Didn't he commute their sentences? It's just he can only do that federally, and most people who are in prison for nonviolent drug offenses are in state prison. I'm just surprised the ACLU had that opinion. Well, they do protect our civil liberties, and the idea that you are exempt from the Second Amendment if you've ever consumed an incredibly popular drug that's legal in a majority of America is pretty bad for civil liberties, you know? Again, like, this is very selectively enforced. Very rarely is a person actually brought up in federal charges for lying on their ATF form, and I have no doubt that this has been used to selectively prosecute people of color. No doubt whatsoever.
Court term comes to an end. The High Court issuing a unanimous ruling today in the U.S. versus Himani. The justices siding with a Texas man who argued a law barring drug users from owning guns was a violation of his Second Amendment rights.
With more, we're joined by KTLA law and politics analyst Jessica Levinson. Jessica, good to have you with us. Let's start.
It also makes no sense on its own terms. Like, what other constitutional rights do you lose because you've used drugs? Not because you've been convicted of a crime, mind you. Not because you're a felon, not because of any of that. But on the federal level, what other constitutional right are you barred from because you've used drugs? Freedom of speech? Well, I mean, maybe sometimes in practice, but that's not legally the law, right? Like, there's no form that you have to fill out that indicates that if you've ever smoked marijuana once in your life, it means that you're exempt from freedom of speech. It's pretty specific to the Second Amendment that we've had this inconsistency. And it was, yes, used largely to bar Hispanics and blacks from owning guns.
The basics and explain to us what was being argued here. Was this about illegal use of a controlled substance or about possession of a firearm?
It was about those two things together. So
I'm assuming the reasoning is the same logic as the whole you can't operate heavy machinery while on some medications. Nope, because it's still illegal to use firearms while under the influence. This was just, if you have ever used marijuana, you cannot own a firearm.
Case is about a federal statute that says that if you are the user of controlled substances or if you're an addict, then you should not possess a gun. And the argument in this case, it was not about whether the statute is constitutional, but whether or not the statute was constitutional.
Also, what right requires you to self-incriminate, which violates the Fifth? Yeah, seriously, too. They're literally on a form. They're like, hey, have you committed a federal crime? What the fuck kind of question is that?
As applied to Mr. Hamani, who was a frequent marijuana user, but there was no indication that he was a danger to himself or others. So I think the big takeaway here is it's a Second Amendment case. It's rare that these are unanimous, but the court found that it was just too broadly applied as to Mr. Hamani. But I think there's still the possibility that you could see addicts, that you could see other people who are a danger to community, where there are laws that can apply and say you cannot possess a gun.
Yeah, like if you're a felon or if you've committed violent crimes or if you use a firearm while under the influence. Yeah, all those still apply. It just means that you cannot be barred from your Second Amendment rights for having ever used marijuana, which is insane.
So the decision itself, as we mentioned at the top, was a unanimous one, but it was narrowly focused and it did not strike down the federal law in question. Instead, it came down to the application of the law.
That's exactly right. So this was actually the same statute that was applied to Hunter Biden when he was charged with being a felon.
How did Alito vote? Unanimous!
In possession of a gun. And I think that the decision leaves open the possibility that other people, potentially people like Hunter Biden, who were using cocaine at the time, for instance, that they could be prosecuted under the statute. And I think that's the only way you get a unanimous decision on a Second Amendment case, which is you make it very, very narrow.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that this was used in the Hunter Biden case, but it's not often applied. The DOJ estimates only about 300 people are charged under it a year.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's right.
Really wonder what the racial breakup of that is, you know?
So I think what we're really doing is not necessarily looking so much at this particular statute, although, of course, that was the statute issue. But what we're doing is applying a case that was decided a number of years ago called the Bruin case, where the court basically laid out a new standard for when you can limit the possession or purchase of guns. And I think what you see today is just a clarification of that standard. The court
in the States, is use of marijuana a misdemeanor? No. Federally, it is a felony to use marijuana. But the federal government does not have jurisdiction in all cases. Usually, when you're prosecuted, it is the state government that's prosecuting you. If you're in a state's territory, you're not being pursued by the feds. The FBI is not going after you or whatever. How can you federally smoke weed? Well, if you smoke weed in a territory controlled by the federal government, like, say, an airport, that it would be a felony. You could get gone after for that. But yeah, they're gonna move it to Schedule 3. I think they're working on that. But still felony. But with you know, if you're in a state that has it legalized, even if the federal government could technically go after you, they're not going to for practical reasons.
Basically said, look at the text of the Second Amendment, look at the history at the time it was ratified, and try and find a historic analog where we did limit gun ownership when the Second Amendment was ratified. The government said, well, this is like habitual drunkard laws that were in place in the late 1700s. The court said, not so fast. Habitual drunkards.
58.1% were black. Jesus fucking Christ, really? Damn, that's pretty straightforward. So for the crime of possessing a firearm while having ever smoked marijuana, even though 13% of the population is black and there's no evidence that black people use marijuana more than white people, 58% of people who were federally charged with this are black, shows you pretty clearly why. When was this law put into place? When was this law put into place? What did the article say? This law was put into place in like 1968 or something? Yeah, 1968. I wonder why. I wonder what was going on back then. Yeah, 58.1% were black. Jesus Christ.
They're way worse than people who use marijuana every other day.
Very interesting. And also interesting about this case is the political bedfellows that are unusual, right? We're talking about gun violence prevention groups like the Brady Center and Giffords Law Center backing the Trump administration. Meanwhile, you have the ACLU and NRA on the same side of Hamani.
Well, that's right. And I think that's because there were a number of different issues at play here. Obviously, for the NRA, they don't want restrictions on gun ownership and gun purchasing. And then for the ACLU, I think they felt that this was too much of a restriction on criminals and that this was, in fact, a violation of people's civil liberties. Then you have the Trump administration defending this federal law, as you mentioned, not that frequently used, but you also, of course, have advocates of gun control saying we also want this law to be implemented.
Great. Well, whatever. We won.